and welcome to EDASC's 2021 Economic Forecast Night. You know, it's been a little bit more than a year since we got together, all of us in person for dinner, and what a year it's been. We'll talk some about that, but for now, we're adapting as everybody else is, and we're doing economic forecast in this shorter, smaller format. You will be able to access it anytime you like on our website. And what we'll be doing to supplement it is having more sessions like this throughout the year where we talk about different important economic issues. So this isn't your only shot for this year. First of all, I'd like to thank and acknowledge our sponsors for tonight, the law firm of Chmelik Sitkin Davis. We appreciate everything they do to help us carry out the economic development program for Skagit County and our whole region. Also, we would like to thank our investors, particularly our signature investors, and all investors, public and private, because through your support, we can do this important work. First, I'm going to talk about what EDASC has done this year and what we're up to in the new year. And then I will introduce our speaker for the night, who will give us his presentation, and then we'll have a little bit of question and answer back and forth. So let's get started. Economic development in the time of the pandemic. Well, some things are the same, and we have relied for a lot of support on our wonderful board of directors, which makes up one part of the EDASC team, and our EDASC staff. We couldn't do any of this without an amazing staff. That's the strength of our organization, as well as our board and investors, and we so appreciate everything everybody does. The mission statement is relatively new. It's from our combined organizations. You remember, there used to be an EDASC Foundation, and now we're all combined into one. So the mission statement now talks about business attraction, retention, and expansion, but also a lot about capacity building of our community development for a prosperous, sustainable, and equitable community. And importantly, we mention while maintaining Skagit County's natural beauty and quality of life. That is so important to all of us, and that's why many of us are here. What is economic development? It's defined as the intentional practice of improving a community's economic well-being. We attract and create and help companies retain jobs and expand. We foster a resilient economic environment that provides a tax base for our counties and cities and ports. And we take care to make sure that our environment is inclusive and equitable and sustainable in terms of natural and human resources. And then we are the connectors in economic development. We connect government, industry, education, and the private sector, as well as nonprofits and other community stakeholders. EDASC performs economic development on behalf of Skagit County, the 4 cities, the 4 towns, the 2 ports, all sorts of other governmental organizations such as Skagit PUD, all our 7 school districts, and then the entire nonprofit sector, which would include social services, arts and cultural organizations, and social organizations, and then, of course, the entire private business sector, large, small, and in between, and in any kind of economic sector you might think of. Our strategic plan focuses, as I talked about, on business growth and on building our community into a stronger force and a more resilient community. So what did we do when this pandemic first hit just about a year ago? I think just about a year ago is when we all started to stay safe and stay home. The very first thing we did was create some online resources for individuals and businesses so they would know how to operate safely under the new conditions. And we provided access to financial assistance and other resources that would help them continue to operate. We connected a lot of these companies who were pivoting to different activities. Many of the manufacturers, for example, started making personal protective equipment or hand sanitizer. And we did all this while working from home. One of the first things we did on behalf of the governor, as did every county in the state, we worked to distribute Working Washington small business emergency grants. We did more than 10 grant programs during this period, during the past year. And you'll see this graphic displayed for you on how the grants were distributed across the county and really how meaningful they were. Total of 10 programs, over $2 million awarded to over 260 small businesses and nonprofit organizations across Skagit County. Communications became extremely important, even more important, during this time when we were all working apart. And we beefed up our communications efforts, both our website and online resources, downloadable resources. We communicated about these grant programs, about the PPP and EIDL loans to everybody. We did this in Spanish too, to make sure that everybody was able to access the information. We hosted regular calls with our Congress people to make sure for our 5-county region that people were plugged into what's going on. And finally, that grant map that you saw, we wanted to make sure that everything was equitably distributed and that all parts of our county were able to take advantage of these resources. Our business retention and expansion program interacted with 1,000 companies. And if you think about it, there are 6,000 companies registered to do business in Skagit County. So this is really an extremely large impact. It could have been anything from resources during the pandemic to some companies were still growing and expanding during this time. So providing assistance there, finding buyers and sellers, new markets, whatever might come up, and connecting them with their governmental bodies and elected representatives that can help them achieve their goals. Business retention and expansion, as I said, takes lots of different forms, and you'll see here 3 examples providing the opportunity for us to help with all different kinds of issues, whether it's site selection for a company that's growing and moving, or workforce issues, finding good people to work. There are legislative and regulatory issues. And then we always help companies with their succession plans, and sometimes with business transitions when the owners want to sell, but we all are concerned that the company remain here in Skagit County and growing. At any given time, we have probably a dozen businesses in the business attraction pipeline. Now, business attraction may be what people hear about all the time with regard to economic development, but in reality, it accounts for less than 10% and maybe well under 10% of job growth in any community you might look at. Most job growth, over 90%, is from the existing businesses that are growing. Nonetheless, it's really important to keep bringing new blood into the community and into the economy. So we're always looking at businesses that fit our size, our culture, and our values of sustainability. We focus on maritime and agriculture-related businesses, and particularly our strength here in Skagit County, advanced manufacturing. Some of the newer businesses here in Skagit County: Commercial Aircraft Interiors, Bounty Marine, and 8 Degrees LLC, which is a chocolate manufacturer, and I'm sure we'll all want to find out more about that. Capacity building is really what sets economic development apart, because we're working in the here and now, doing projects that are current. But we're also always looking at how can we make this a stronger, more resilient, and resilience, of course, is what we've seen going on in the past year. and more equitable community. So that comes through a lot of networking opportunities, collaboration with lots of different organizations, and bringing groups together. There are not many things that are irrelevant to economic development. So economic development can be all about education and training. It can be about childcare, because if you don't have childcare, you can't go to work. It can be about transportation for the same reason. Healthcare. If you aren't healthy, if you don't have housing, all these issues are important in economic development. And while EDASC may not be driving that bus, we want to be on the bus. So some of our capacity building activities, you know, our highly prized program of Leadership Skagit that we run in conjunction with Skagit Valley College. That's developing a cadre of business and civic leadership, servant leaders. We also convene stakeholders for a variety of different things and the countywide issues like I was talking about. Economic development and action for capacity building also involves agriculture. And if we want to preserve our agricultural lands here in Skagit County, we have to make sure that people can continue to make money off of them. And one of the ways to do that is working through the Innovation Partnership Zone with our many partners listed there. The IPZ has developed Genuine Skagit Valley, which is an origin mark, a certification mark that shows that a product came from the Skagit Valley. It's building a brand awareness of the high quality and high value of our Skagit Valley products. And we're working to grow that along with our many partners there. Social justice and equity. Well, in addition to the pandemic, the other biggest story this past year was the growing realization nationwide of the equity and social justice issues and defaults in our country, whether that is about law enforcement or economic opportunity. The economic opportunity part is really more where EDASC can get involved. And in light of what happened, the EDASC board formed a social justice and equity committee, education and equity, headed by Skagit Valley College President Dr. Tom Keegan. And that committee, along with all of EDASC, is going to explore different ways to learn about these topics and work towards ways to bring more equity into the particularly economic picture. So one of the areas that I've done personally is I've conducted a workshop on unconscious bias. I've done that nationally, statewide, and here locally for various groups. What that talks about is how we all have these unconscious biases, all of us human animals. It's estimated by researchers we may have 50,000 of them. And the key to it is understanding them and learning how to overcome them. What we are about at EDASC is making sure that everybody has the opportunity to achieve prosperity. And so one of the things we've done is Latino business retention and expansion. With the retirement of the longtime and only program director last year, we're taking a fresh look at what will be the most useful activities to help not only Latinx entrepreneurs, but other immigrant entrepreneurs and people who face barriers in starting and running and owning a business. So in doing that, we're going to look at all different areas, and I'm very excited to announce that in conjunction with all 6 chambers of commerce and with others across the county, we're going to have an equity learning series that will start April 6th and will be monthly on different topics in this area. Our Skagit Business Guide. So you may remember that usually when we're all having dinner together at the Swinomish Casino and Lodge, we hand out our brand new business guide. Well, it's out, it's been mailed to our investors, and you can always get more copies if you just contact us. We are so proud of the improvements we've made and retooling we've done to this volume. Everybody contributed, and as with our communications effort, our communications manager, Aaron Weinberg, has done a great job. This is produced by Skagit Publishing, and we have a lot of engaging articles in there, as well as the investor guide that you'll want to read. Internal improvements. If you are fortunate enough to have met Audra Rammerman, our Director of Finance and Administration, you will know that she is great to the last detail and multi-talented. So she has been working this past year to make sure that our organizations are combined properly. We are now streamlined into one 501c3 nonprofit organization, and that opens the door too for the possibility of more grant funding. You may want to take a look at where our revenue sources are, and it's been different this year because of all the grant programs and the grant administration fees associated with that. And then our expenditures are largely for programs and administration. As with most nonprofits, the greatest cost is our staff and our team, in addition to Aaron and Audra, Tamsin Bell, our Economic Development Manager, Mary Heffernan Trester, who is running the Leadership Skagit program, and Sunny Sires, our Program Support Coordinator, are doing an amazing job. So what's up for 2021? We are beginning work on an economic recovery strategy. It's time to do a new strategic plan, and particularly one in light of all the changes that we've talked about. Events, it's a question mark. Obviously, Schmoozfair is not something that's going to be pandemic friendly at this point. An economic forecast, we had to do it this way. We are hoping that by the summer we'll be able to do some kind of outdoor activity that may be somewhat like a Schmoozfair, but with a different purpose. So stay tuned for more on that. Our target industries we've talked about already. We're going to keep working on those. And then all these different learning opportunities in addition to Leadership Skagit, on economics, on equity, on value-added agriculture, and then the usual things we help businesses with, better business practices and all kinds of workshops on how to do more and better in your business. And then, as always, we continue to work on strengthening our partnerships and collaborating with more businesses, organizations, and groups to achieve what we do, because no one organization or one person can do all this alone.
Hello, my name is Matt Paxton. I'm an attorney at Chmelik Sitkin Davis and of counsel for EDASC. At Chmelik Sitkin Davis, we know that there's strength in numbers. That's why we have a team of lawyers with expertise in business and municipal law. That's also why we've been sponsor of this economic forecast for over 10 years. We know that when business leaders have relevant information about market conditions, they make decisions that strengthen the entire community. I hope you enjoy this year's presentation.
We are ready for our keynote speaker now, and I'd like to introduce him to you. Chip Hunter was appointed Dean of Washington State University's Carson College of Business in 2015. Dean Hunter is committed to building educational opportunities that create upward mobility for students and strengthen the Pacific Northwest economy. An award-winning scholar specializing in human resources and industrial relations, Dean Hunter's research spans industrial settings with a focus on managing workplaces and human resources to promote organizational goals and create positive outcomes for workers. Dean Hunter earned his doctorate in industrial relations and human resource management from the Sloan School of Management at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Prior to that, he earned his master's in philosophy, politics, and economics from Oxford University, and his bachelor's degree in business comes from the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. We in Washington are truly grateful to Dean Hunter for his leadership and his scholarship, and we look forward to hearing from him now.
Hey, good morning, John, and thanks for inviting me to share findings and insights from the Carson College's 4th Annual Business in the Northwest report and to talk about the role that WSU and our Carson College of Business play in education and research. We serve the Pacific Northwest and beyond as well. I want to start by noting that partnerships between the business community and higher education institutions are really important to our region's economy, and our Carson College is committed to serving businesses and the community by educating and developing our future talent pool. We also work with organizations to increase our shared understanding of what's happening in the business world around us. And following my presentation, I do look forward to discussing this with you some more. I'd like to hear about some of the issues that are on the minds of those in your business community. I'll talk first about our Business in the Northwest report, where we wanted to hear directly from Pacific Northwest business leaders and employees to get a better sense of the state of the business climate and how region's business community is faring. Our 4th annual Business in the Northwest report is based on a survey of 1,050 Pacific Northwest business leaders, employees, and especially in this survey, a focus on Gen Z employees, our youngest members of the workforce. And we do this to provide a deeper look at how the perceived trajectory of business in the Pacific Northwest is trending and how it's been altered by the pandemic. And so from here, I want to turn to some of the key findings from this year's report. I'll interweave these with some of the things we know about what's happening in your region as well. Key findings, well, businesses, the heartbeat of our Pacific Northwest community, have been faced by challenges they've never seen before. This COVID-19 pandemic has been incredibly disruptive. When the first stay-at-home orders went out in March of 2020, we didn't know what impact we'd see on the business community. And it's been a year now. We've seen some businesses permanently shutter, others with a lot of uncertainty about what the future holds, and some thriving. Amid closures, a lot of uncertainty, and a year of heightened anxiety, our report in general finds that business leaders and employees in the Pacific Northwest, by and large, maybe amazingly, remain cautiously optimistic. And now we'll talk a little bit more specific about why we can say this during a pandemic. It's not all roses. Across the Pacific Northwest, 3 out of 4 business leaders and employees say COVID-19 has had a negative effect on their company. And among the business leaders, this is up 10 points since last June. We did our first COVID-19 Pacific Northwest business survey in June 2020. Following on 2 prior surveys that had a pandemic not even in their sights. And even in June, we thought, well, when are we going to get back to normal? We're still not back to normal, and we've seen this 10-point bump since then. What are they concerned about? Well, the continued effects of COVID-19 that we picked up early this year and the lack of a widely available vaccine were the top reported barriers to success among business leaders when we did our survey. Now, it wasn't all COVID. Macro issues which were picked up included global uncertainty and social polarization in the environment were also really critical here. Now, while we surveyed the entire Pacific Northwest, we wanted to make sure we also were able to comment a little bit about what's going on in Skagit County. And while it was difficult to pull this out of the survey in sufficient sample size to make real clear comments, I did want to note that while you may know better than I do what we've seen, let's keep your local context in mind. You've seen an increase in food insecurity, a greater demand for services at local food banks due to unemployment and economic hardship. We know tourism matters to you, and events and conferences have been canceled throughout the region due to the pandemic. You know, the cancellation of the Tulip Festival was not a minor disruption here. It was big. Like the business owners we surveyed for this report, your organizers, your farmers, your business leaders showed a lot of grit through innovation, but there's no denying that these kinds of things had financial impact. And we've seen the pandemic's negative effects continue for a year, and businesses have depleted the financial assistance they were provided earlier. The pandemic's continued to take a toll across folks across the region and in Skagit County. Now, as we pivot back to thinking about the region in general, the whole Pacific Northwest, what have we seen? Well, prior to COVID-19, our surveys showed the business outlook was great. Over half of business leaders and employees felt that the Pacific Northwest business climate had been strengthening in recent years. This year's report shows a flattened trajectory. The climate is no longer so rosy. Accounting for COVID-19, this year's report finds only 35% of the leaders, about a third, and even fewer, about 17% of employees saying that the business climate is on a positive trajectory. And this has not been even by sector. At the Carson College of Business, we have a nationally ranked hospitality business management program. That school is one of the top in the nation, as I mentioned, and we wanted to take a minute to look at what we know from their work about impact to the tourism and hospitality sector here in Washington. Due to travel restrictions and stay-at-home orders, they've really taken a significant hit. According to the Washington Tourism Alliance, we saw a decline in hotel revenue from the beginning of the pandemic that was dramatic, a drop in air traffic that was even greater, and jobs lost in the leisure and hospitality sector actually represented almost half of all jobs lost in the state last year. About 500,000 jobs lost in the industry. That's a big deal, and a big deal to our students, our recent grads as well, who are looking for opportunities out there. So that's a really tough piece of the story, despite this general climate of uncertainty and a little bit of optimism. Now we want to take a closer look at how businesses have adapted during the pandemic to better serve their customers and employees. This is, again, back to our Business in the Northwest survey. And what we've seen is that businesses across the region have continued to put measures in place to support their employees during the pandemic. Among the top measures were, and continue to include, changed work schedules. This was a hit right away during the pandemic. Things like flexible work hours were put into place, and it's up a little bit since last June, but that was something that was undertaken right away. Work protocols and changes in those protocols to accommodate new opportunities and challenges during the pandemic also continue. 61% of our respondents tell us they've done this, and this is up 9 points since last June. Also, I think as the pandemic has endured, we have seen increased emphasis on effective company-wide communication, with now 61% of employers telling us that has been a key response to the pandemic. This is up 14 points from last June, I think, again, as the more enduring nature of the pandemic has become understood. And we've seen investments in new work equipment. Over half of our respondents now say they're doing that. And implementation of mental health resources for employees. That's up a little bit from last June as well. We've seen also adaptation and changes in business operations to navigate toward the unique pandemic climate. And these changes are beginning to pay off. Business leaders call out a number of things as most helpful to their businesses. Things like increasing online retail efforts where it's appropriate, looking at delivery, whether it's mail or door-to-door, and for many businesses, introducing new products or services. We also asked in our Business in the Northwest survey about the role the government's played in the pandemic response, and we wanted to know how business leaders viewed their own government's response, particularly at the state level. Keep in mind that our survey was the Pacific Northwest region, and we looked at Washington, Oregon, and Idaho represented in proportion of their population in the region. What we saw was that across the region, business leaders have high confidence in their local and state government's pandemic responses, despite the fact that those responses vary from region to region, with almost 3/4 reporting positive feelings about the response across the region. This is up significantly since last June. People were much less satisfied last June than they were in early 2021 about the pandemic response by the government. And when we look more closely at the 3 states in the sample, we see not only that the majority of business leaders feel positive about their state government's response, but we see that the state of Washington's business leaders feel the most positive about their state's response to COVID-19. With 81% being happy with the state government response. Picking this up in late 2020, early 2021, we saw less enthusiasm for the federal government response at that time. One thing we added to the survey this year is a look at our youngest members of the workforce, what we call Gen Z. and how they're faring amid the pandemic. This is employees between the ages of 18 and 23. And interestingly, despite the stereotype of this generation as being more facile with technology and likely to be more adaptable to things like remote work and flexible hours, what we find is that navigating remote work with little experience to fall back on has proved challenging for these employees. 47% report that working from home has a negative impact on their mental well-being. And interestingly, they're actually more likely than other employees to be affected by considerations like at-home distractions, decreased ability to focus, and disruption in their work-life balance. Now, whether this is special to Gen Z or this is the sort of disruption that would affect young people in any era is something that we can't tease out from a one-time survey. And it is worth noting that things like at-home distractions are more likely to plague people who are living in crowded conditions, living with their folks where they don't want to be, having trouble focusing, having disrupted work-life balance. Again, our younger employees are really reporting these in greater proportion than more experienced employees. And the reason we think this is interesting is because I think there were perhaps stereotypes out there that our Gen Z would really embrace this opportunity to not come into the office. They're on their phones all the time. We know that they like to do things remotely. Well, it turns out they don't like to work remotely any more than any of the rest of us. In fact, they like it less. Now, Gen Z may fare worse with these challenges, but we also know that people are getting ready to return to the office. It's about 2/3 of people reporting that they are ready to return to the office full time. And this is across the board, leaders, employees, and our youngest employees saying that they're ready to get back. So it's worth noting that, and I think we're going to see, if we did the survey today, I think the proportion would be even higher. We are seeing a readiness to return. I think people understand that they're not going to be ready to return until the pandemic's under control. What they're seeing is that with new policies and adaptation and the increases in vaccination and the positive forecasts there, they're getting ready to come back to work. Now, we're also looking at what business leaders see in the business climate. This is the original motivation for our Business in the Northwest survey. We didn't set out to study the pandemic 4 years ago. We didn't know it was coming. But it's interesting to look at their reaction to the pandemic as interpreted through their look ahead at the business climate. And this year we see that the percentage of business leaders who agree that the business climate is changing in a good way is up from last year. We moved from 68% in 2020 to 75% in this year's report. And so we see that there's a light at the end of the tunnel. Despite these challenges, most business leaders and employees really feel that their company is prepared to withstand changes and challenges in the next 3 years. I also want to say a little bit about the effects of COVID-19 on inequality in our region and across the country. I think this is very important to note that while we're reporting many business leaders are optimistic, there's a light at the end of the tunnel, we also see challenges here. And we know that in recent decade, the United States as a whole and our region have seen widening gaps between the haves and have-nots by nearly all measures you can look at, whether it's wealth or income, household income, individual income. We are seeing increased inequality over the last 20 years or so. And there is no doubt, while data are preliminary, that the pandemic has exacerbated these gaps. They're clear in the short run. I am concerned, and I think the data will begin to bear this out soon, that these effects may be persistent, that lost opportunities temporarily have enduring and long-term effects. We've seen these on the heels of other recessions. We know, for example, that the young people who hit the job market during the Great Recession have not recovered from losses. You don't want to start your career during a recession. It's likely that, and I feel bad for our Carson College grads of 2020, you don't want to start your career during a pandemic either. Now, what do we want to do about this? I think that's an important question for public policy to consider, because we know that public policy has a big impact on inequality by looking to prioritize employment and looking at job creation as a tool of public policy, we can mitigate the effects of things like a pandemic or a recession on inequality, and over the long term look to make sure that there's opportunity for everybody, not just the folks at the top end. Now, I will also note that it's not simply public policy here that matters. Our employers make choices every day about the way that they organize work, the way they train folks, the way they pay them, and what they ask people to do, and who they bring on board. And one of the things that we do in the Carson College is make sure that our students understand that as employers, their choices actually have an impact on important social issues, and that as citizens, they want to think about their responsibilities, not just to their shareholders, which are important, but to their employees and to the community in general. Now, I'm also a cheerleader for education, and we know that earnings come with increased education, and the college education is one of the best ways to ensure that people stay on the more successful end of the income distribution. The more that we can make sure that education is available to those who are willing and able to benefit from it, rather than being confronted with impediments for those folks, we can also mitigate inequality. And what I would say is that I think, and I'm biased because I'm the dean of a business school, but I think business education actually matters a lot, because not only is business education valuable for those students who take advantage of the opportunity to increase their skills and enter the labor market as accountants, as operations managers, as human resource managers, as financiers, all of those kinds of things. But they're also going to be the people that are shaping the choices made by employers that contribute to either increased or diminished inequality. And they're going to be powerful voices in the public policy arena as well. And so as we educate those students of the future, those leaders of the future as our students, we want to make sure that they have an understanding of their responsibility as employers to contribute to understanding of where we are with these issues. And here's the good news, I hope, for Skagit County, is we are bringing this to Everett. Our business administration bachelor's degree program is our most popular degree. It's the most enrolled business program across the Washington State University system. And now it's going to be available to students who don't want online, but they need to stay closer to home in Everett. We will be offering face-to-face business programs in Everett and a business administration bachelor's degree in Everett this fall. We're very excited about that. These programs are designed for transfer students. They're degree completions with the junior and senior year coursework provided in Everett. And this is going to be the 8th bachelor's degree that Everett offers. It's our second one there. We've been offering our hospitality business degree for a few years now, and we're really excited to bring this to Northwest Washington. It's a big deal for us to make sure that we've got this degree on all 4 of our campuses, and so we're adding faculty and we're getting ready to meet new students. Couldn't be more pleased that we're doing that. As I wrap up, I guess I'll say that I hope that what we shared with you, the data from the Business in the Northwest report, as well as some of the other things I talked about, can help drive some meaningful conversation among you and with us around these issues and really propel us forward as a business community. I guess in wrapping up, I'd just say that I hope you'll help me in looking for ways that we can collaborate together. I'd love to understand what we can do for your business and how our higher education institutions can work with you to make sure that we're building a pipeline of future leaders that you can employ and benefit from working with. Through these kinds of partnerships, I'm hoping we'll work together to create a thriving workforce in the Pacific Northwest. And with that, John, I'd look forward to chatting with you a little bit.
Thank you very much, Chip. That was really informative, and the research that you all do in getting in touch with a wide sample of the business community is really impressive. There are some questions. We solicited some questions from our partners here in Skagit County, and I wanted to relay some of them to you.
Sure.
Toss them at you and see how it goes.
Great.
So one of the things we're hearing a lot about is people are going to be leaving Seattle in droves and moving to Skagit County and overrunning us. How do you see that happening in terms of people and businesses migrating northward to Skagit County?
Well, I thought you might ask about that, John. So we did a little research on that. It wasn't picked up in our Business in the Northwest report. And like you, I'm reading the news and seeing that everybody's leaving the city, and where are they going? And we picked up a report from Redfin that showed that the net outflow of homeowners leaving Seattle was 363 in the second quarter of 2019, and it was over 6,000 in 2020. So we've got a 1,000% increase or something like that going on. So where are they going? Well, maybe not Skagit County, at least not just yet. What we're hearing and from the realtors themselves is that Snohomish County, Pierce County, it's not black and white. And not everyone is going to leave the city, but they're looking for locations where they're not going to add hours to their commute time, but where they may not have to commute every day and be able to find something more affordable. So they're going to stay what we expect is relatively close and put up with an occasional lousy commute, but it may be. And there was a realtor from Windermere, actually an economist from Windermere Real Estate, who mentioned to Cairo. We got this interview from him where he said, we're seeing relocation, but it's not as extensive as some people like to think it is. But it is true that we're going to see people continue to work remotely. Where that leaves you, I'm not so sure yet.
I would probably agree with you, Chip, on the idea that the demise of the city has been greatly exaggerated. I think there are a lot of people, particularly younger folks, who are going to want to be in that kind of environment when the coast is clear. So I think you've already addressed this, but how do you see the economic recovery unfolding as more and more people get vaccinated?
Yeah, that's, I think, the question on everybody's mind. And I think that's the right way to ask the question, is what happens as we get the public health challenge addressed? And so this announcement this week that we expect to have enough vaccines for all adults by the end of May is extremely promising for the business community. We should see our state move forward, and we should see reopening, but it is going to take some time. I'm on the optimistic side of this. I know Governor Inslee continues to be cautious, pauses in reopening. We're still in phase 2. And we also see some concerning trends where people say they're not going to get vaccinated at the rates we'd like. But I do think that Dr. Fauci, for example, is too conservative in his estimates when he says we'll be approaching normal by the end of the year. I think that sooner than that, we'll see lots of businesses restoring activity. I think a couple of key tells will be when business travel and conventions start to return. We don't know how much people are going to really want those, but we know it's not zero. And those are going to be coming back, I expect, as people get their vaccines and we see what's going on. And I'm really looking forward myself to welcoming students back to Washington State University's campuses for face-to-face instruction in August. We're planning for that. Again, critically, it's going to matter that we get the public health challenges addressed. We're not going to do anything that's unsafe at Washington State, and I think our businesses in the state of Washington have made the right choices along with our policies to make sure that we're doing this correctly. But I think doing it correctly is going to have us back on our feet over the summer and in early fall.
That's great. That's very encouraging. So something that occurred to me while I was listening to you earlier, I'd be interested in your opinion based on your conversations with businesses in the Pacific Northwest. What do you think is the most effective form of support from government for small businesses and local communities?
Well, I think in the first wave, those PPP loans were pretty helpful. They came with a layer of complexity and bureaucracy that meant they weren't necessarily distributed clearly or equitably at all times. But I think just getting that out there and having people think about what they could change while there was a lifeline there mattered. As the pandemic's continued, though, I think we are seeing not just businesses, but the larger community running out of resources. And so I think this relief plan coming through the federal legislative branch and that President Biden expects to sign is going to be pretty helpful to getting businesses back on their feet. The planned bill, as I understand it, has about $250 million for small business assistant grants. And we've also got grants to help childcare businesses stay open, which will help other businesses in turn. We've got food assistance, and then we've got continued relief for unemployed workers, which I think is a big deal in industries like the one that's so close to my heart, the hospitality industry, where many of my grads are looking for opportunities. I do think, though, that this is not an ordinary recession. And so the kinds of aid that are most helpful are not general stimulus, but it's more like disaster relief. It's got to be targeted to the places that are the most in need. I think a little bit of stimulus, we'll see a little bit of effort there, but proportionally, I think the calculation here that we want to do this in targeted fashion is the right way to go.
Yeah. So we solicited a lot of questions from our viewers. And the next three all have to do in some form or fashion with diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Okay.
From Dr. Marisa Herrera from the Center for Inclusive Entrepreneurship.
Hello, Chip. Marisa Herrera with the Center for Inclusive Entrepreneurship. I have a question about the economic impact of COVID-19 on Latino, Native American, and African American communities. What's the forecast for 2021, and how can those communities recover and thrive?
That is a challenging question. I appreciate the opportunity to think about it and talk about it, but I don't have great answers on the thrive side. I will offer some suggestions. We do know already that the impacts have been unequal. Minority-owned businesses in Washington have really suffered. We know small businesses are a big chunk of our private employment, and we also know that minority-owned businesses tend to be smaller. So they are getting hit disproportionately by this pandemic, as have the employees in those businesses. They're among the hardest hit by any measure. So we've seen unemployment rates be higher among communities with large immigrant and minority populations, and the small businesses are getting hammered here. So again, I'll come back to what I said before about targeted help in a kind of it's like a hurricane or a tornado, but it's what the sorts of businesses that the pandemic has hit. We really have to think about that. And if we think about that as a matter of policy, we will, I think, be able to target the aid to those who have suffered the most. And in this case, it is those communities. But I would also say that we also want to remember that this is, while I mentioned this, a short run hit, these could have very long run effects. And so we want to be continually attentive to making sure that other routes to opportunity are continued to be considered, that we look at opportunities for folks to extend their education and to make sure that we're providing the kinds of support they need to do that. The last thing I'll say, and I think this is really critical, is we want to make sure that access to public health is also a part of the story. So far, unfortunately, at least the data I've seen, it appears that we've got lower vaccination rates among our Black, our indigenous communities in the state of Washington, and that is concerning. Our Hispanic community members also are being vaccinated less, and they often are the folks who are more at risk because of living conditions or working conditions in which they find themselves. So we've really got to get to the sources of these disparities, whether it's vaccine supply, it's mistrust, it's underrepresentation in healthcare, figure out how to overcome those factors and make sure that everybody's got an opportunity not just to get work, but to get vaccinated. I think that's critical too.
Well, that's good. This question is from Jackie Beamer, who is the owner of Brand Query, a public relations firm here in Mount Vernon.
Hi, Chip. My name is Jackie Beamer. Thank you for taking my question, or questions. I actually have two. One being, how can companies hire more women and people of color providing them opportunities into leadership positions. And then my second question is, how can companies accelerate the pace in which they place women and people of color onto their board of directors?
That's a great question, and it's a challenging one. I think the helpful way to start to think about it, and I've seen this actually really catalyze some interesting discussions, not just in higher ed, but across the bridge between higher ed and the business community, is to really think carefully about what we mean by equity. And what we mean there is that we don't want to see particular barriers in the way of some people and not others because of who they are. And it may take a lot of investigation and a lot of work to remove those barriers. Is it access to education? Is it implicit bias? Is it explicit bias? Is it working assumptions that certain jobs are only appropriate for certain people? All of those things are out there. Education is a part of what's going on here. We're looking continually at ways to make our students aware of the sources of these kinds of inequity and what they can do about them. But I don't think it's only a question of teaching people to think differently. I think we've got to look at the kinds of policies that institutionalize the results we've got and ask ourselves whether we want to look at different kinds of policies. Who do we consider for these roles? What are the required qualifications? Are they really relevant to those kinds of things? And I think it's not trivial to say that we know that more diverse groups will produce more interesting, creative, and sustainable solutions to most of the problems that we face. Just populating a group with diversity, though, isn't going to be enough. We've got to make sure there's true inclusion in those groups, and so that means that we've got to get broader buy-in for this. I think in the end, the most powerful interventions are those that are connected to business goals. And so to ask oneself the question, how does my business make better decisions, serve customers more effectively with an inclusive and equitable workplace, is, I think, the most critical question a business can ask.
Yeah, that's right. We saw Starbucks in the last few months put that as part of their critical evaluation factors for their executives.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly an example of what I'm talking about, John, which is you got to think through the policies. If you for example, have a very important performance review that doesn't touch on these issues, you can guess that people in their daily jobs will not make it a priority to touch on these issues. And if you institutionalize it, you will see action.
That's right. Well, Chip, thank you so much for being with us tonight and sharing a lot of your important work. I know there are a lot of Cougs here in Skagit County, as well as a lot of Huskies, and as well as a lot of us who went somewhere else. So we appreciate you being here with us and sharing, and we look forward to talking to you again.
John, thanks a lot for having me. And for the Cougs in the audience, I would be remiss if I did not say, go Cougs!
Thanks a lot. And from the downtown Mount Vernon studios of Transmedia Vision, we bid you all a good night. Thank you. Thank you again for joining us for EDASC's Economic Forecast Night. And thank you to our speaker, Dean Chip Hunter. We also want to thank the law firm of Chmelik Sitkin Davis once again for being our sponsor for tonight's event, as well as all our investors, public and private, signature investors particularly, for all you do year-round to help us do what we do. Thanks again, and please join us for more learning opportunities and some strategic planning opportunities in the near future. Look forward to seeing you. Thanks.